Just like to welcome everyone here this evening. Firstly, a very big thank you to Neil for making this huge effort to come and to share this very incredible story. Just the preview that I've had on the story, I had a bit of an idea before, but just the taste that he gave me before, it's absolutely fascinating. And I think we're going to be enthralled this evening to hear the story firsthand. Just a very quick idea from this week's Parsha. Parshas Bamidbar, it starts off with the counting of the Jewish people, and it counts the Jewish people, and it also describes exactly how the Jewish people encamped. And there was the north camp, the south camp, the east, the west. But what the camp of the Jewish people, it was surrounded the Mishkan. It surrounded the place where Hashem rested his presence in this world. And in the Mishkan, in the center of the Mishkan, there was the conductor of the Shekhinah in this world, and that was where the Torah itself rested. It was the Aron in the Mishkan. And since that moment, which we're going to be arriving to Shavuot in a couple of days, of receiving that Torah was a central part of the Jewish story from the time we received it in the desert and throughout history. And I think this is a modern part of that story of the Sefer Torah in our lives, playing that central role. And it's something that we can gain inspiration from leading up to Shavuot and for sure afterwards. With that, I'd like to call on Neil to address us.
Good evening. Thank you, Rabbi Markovitz. Thank you all for coming. The name of this project is Am Echad, Maaseh Echad, one nation, one journey. And I think as we explore the story of this incredible Sefer Torah and the time that we're in now, we'll see how true this is of the Jewish people. I speak to different groups, and some have heard of Ilan Ramon, some have not heard of Ilan Ramon. I'd imagine most people here have heard of Ilan Ramon. Anyone not heard of Ilan Ramon? Don't have to be embarrassed. Anyone not heard of Ilan Ramon? Okay, so just to give you some background, Ilan Ramon was a fighter pilot in the Israeli Air Force and was selected by NASA to be the first Israeli astronaut on STS Columbia. From a very young age, he had this driving passion to try and maximize his life. And his diary has been published. And at the age of 23, when he graduated from the flight school, he actually sent a series of questions to Professor Leibovich, who was a professor, philosopher at Hebrew University, asking him, what's the purpose of life? What are we in this world for? And the answers were pretty broad. But one of the things that he said to Ilan Ramon is that a man's purpose is decided by man himself, and each man has to decide his own journey and his own path. One of the things he suggested to him is to devote yourself to your people. And that's clearly what Ilan Ramon took on in his life, to devote his life to the Jewish people. And he did that in the most incredible way. Just to give you some background in terms of who Ilan Ramon was, besides his fame as the first Israeli astronaut, it's really no exaggeration to say we're all sitting here in the merit of Ilan Ramon. In the early 1980s, Saddam Hussein had built a nuclear reactor with the help of the French and the Italians. Sound familiar? And the Jewish people were facing a really existential threat that if this became active, that there was a real threat to the Jewish people in Israel. And the Mossad was involved in a number of clandestine missions, knocking out a number of the scientists. But the nuclear reactor program still kept going. And eventually Menachem Begin, in an incredible decision, decided that they had to carry out a military operation to knock out the nuclear reactor in Osirak. And there were 8 pilots chosen for this mission. the youngest of which was Ilan Ramon. And when it came to planning the mission, they had to work out how it was possible to fly to Iraq and back and make it. The answer? It's not possible. You cannot fly that distance. There was no refueling mid-air. But in Israel, there's no such thing as no answer. If there's no answer, you find an answer. And Ilan Ramon was given the job of planning this mission. And he came up with a very, very detailed, complex plan of how to lighten the load so that the fuel consumption was less. And he told them initially, you can do it. We're going to get back to Jordan. We'll never make it back to Israel. There's no way we'll make it back. Now, a lot of this information now has become declassified because it's many, many years later. And there's the most incredible footage of Ilan Ramon actually just sort of thinking to himself, what am I doing? He was coming back one day from a training mission, and he knows he's putting his life not at risk. He basically knew he wasn't coming back. They all knew they weren't coming back. There was no way they were coming back. And he describes this feeling of coming back, and this is a real Israeli story, sitting in the traffic and a guy hooting at him. And he says, what am I doing this for? This guy, to come back and get hooted at in the traffic, you know. And then he rethought it, and he was very affected by the Holocaust. Both his parents were Holocaust survivors. In fact, the first flight he took when he became an Israeli pilot was a flight up Auschwitz. He flew himself over Auschwitz, symbolically. And he describes this thought process between, what am I doing for this guy in the traffic to hoot at me, to, I'm doing it because never again. Because my parents survived, and if I'm able to prevent another Holocaust, I'll do it. The question was, who was going to fly in which formation? There's 8 planes that flew, and the most dangerous plane is the plane on the extreme right, because as you turn, that's the one that the radar picks up, and that's the one that's most likely to get hit. Who volunteered to fly that plane? Ilan Ramon. In the most incredibly miraculous, probably one of the most miraculous Air Force attacks in the history of world, Air Force warfare, they flew below radar. There were tourists in the Red Sea that saw them and said, what are Israeli planes doing here? They must be on some, training mission. And King Hussein from Jordan was holidaying in the Gulf. They were flying so low, he saw the Magen David on the planes. And he told the Jordanian government, notify Iraq that they are coming for the nuclear reactor. That message never got there. No one knows how. When they arrived, they were hit by anti-aircraft from every direction. Not one anti-aircraft missile hit them. It was like a completely miraculous mission. And they arrived back safely, and really all 8 planes, it took 90 seconds. Every single plane hit directly on the reactor, which is unheard of as well. Every single plane. They did crazy things. They dropped their fuel tanks in midair to lighten the load, and it could have hit the bombs. They just, it was like wild. Anyway, they Baruch Hashem made it back, and we're here. So, did a good job. And then, that's just a little bit of his Air Force background. And now you know why NASA, when they were looking for an astronaut, chose Ilan Ramon. He was also an incredibly humble human being. Very, very humble human being. And he was selected by NASA to be the first Israeli astronaut, which was a tremendous pride for the Jewish people, tremendous pride, obviously, for his parents. And he was sent by NASA to train in America for many, many years. It was a very complicated mission, and he was sent there to train for many years. And I have a next-door neighbor, literally my next-door neighbor, who was in Ilan Ramon's flight squadron, went to live in Los Angeles, became a Baal Tshuva, and remained in contact with Ilan Ramon. And when I was telling him about this project, he said, I have to show you an email. So he shows me this email. Now, Ilan Ramon is training for this mission. And Yaakov Shemesh sends Ilan Ramon an email saying, have you thought about taking kosher food? The Baal Shuvah asked such a question. So Ilan Ramon asked him like this. This is an email from the 15th of February, 2002. Hello, Yaakov. Sorry it took me some time to respond. You know, life's a bit busy. Thanks for looking after me. And I'm happy to be the shaliach of all of Israel and the Jewish people. That's part of my mission on this space flight. Yes, I had asked NASA for kosher food. And surprisingly, I was accommodated by NASA. So I will have glut kosher food in space. So not only him, but all the astronauts, by the way, had glut kosher food, the non-Jewish ones also. So here you see clearly that Ilan Ramon saw himself as a representative of the Jewish people. This was a mission for the Jewish people.
Rabbi Zvi Konnikov is director of Chabad of the Space and Treasure Coast and met Ilan while he was in training at Kennedy Space Center.
He said to me that he really wants to keep and mark Shabbat in the shuttle, and he wanted me to tell him when would be Shabbat for the 3 weeks that he would be in space. What exact time? When would he keep the Shabbat? His question was, if every 90 minutes is another sunset, so basically another day, and every 10 and a half hours is technically Shabbat, and really every 20 days is Rosh Hashanah, if you get where I'm going.
Houston, we have a problem. For those of you that find davening tough, how about 42 Shmoneh Esrei in 24 hours? Now, this Rab Konnikov, this question had been posed in halacha, theoretically, people going to the pole, people going to the Arctic Circle, but it had never been posed as a practical question. Somebody's going to space and wants to keep Shabbos. How do you do this? So Rabbi Konnikov sent this question to all of the leading Rabbonim in the world. And there's the most fascinating tshuvas, unbelievable response from halachic authorities, working out when should he keep Shabbat. Any idea where there's a precedent to decide such a thing in Torah? Any possible idea of how we would be able to work out such a thing from the Torah, from the Gemara itself? Any ideas? There is a Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos says, Amar Rebbe Huna, Haya mahalach b'derech, if somebody is going on the way, or b'midbar, or if he's lost in the desert, ve'en yodei ametai Shabbos. He doesn't know when is Shabbos. So what does he do? Which day does he keep? Moneh shisha, he counts shisha yamim, he counts 6 days. Umeshama yom achar, he counts the first 6 days, and the 7th day he keeps his Shabbos. Chia bar Rav says, Meshama yom echad, no, he counts the first day, umoyne shisha, and he counts 6 afterwards. So the Gemara asks, what are they arguing about? What's the difference between these two opinions? Ma'asava bebriyaso shel olam. One of these opinions goes with the creation of the world. How was the creation of the world? Yom echad, 6 days, on the 7th day is Shabbos. And the other opinion goes after the creation of man. The first day after man was created was Shabbos. So this was the basis of some of the halachic literature, but there's the most fascinating response of Rabbi Halperin of the Science and Technology Institute, wrote the most comprehensive set of tshuvas on this particular subject. And he said that there's basically 3 opinions. if you go with what we just said, okay, that basically there's going to be 2 Shabbases every 24 hours. 42 Shmoneh Esreis. Ilan Ramon's Jewish diary will be completely out of sync with the world's Jewish diary. And that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense that all of a sudden he's living in one time zone and the whole of the Jewish world is living in another time zone. So another opinion is maybe you count 24-hour periods, because Jewish halachic days are divided in time. We know that by nates, but that was the other opinion. And there's a fascinating opinion which the Klausenberger Rebbe said, and that is when you're not sure what time is, you go with the time of Eretz Yisrael. Because in Kabbalistic terms, in the spiritual world, the time of Eretz Yisrael is the real time. That's the real time. And this actually had halachic implications in the final psak, which was that Ilan Ramon counts 24-hour periods from Cape Canaveral, from the takeoff, until he passes Eretz Yisrael and switches to the time in Eretz Yisrael. So it's like unbelievable, the Kedusha and the spiritual reality of what time in Eretz Yisrael is. Ilan Ramon did something else in space. Which we'll get to. Me working a video presentation is more challenging than Ilan Ramon going to space. Let's get there again.
Miraculously, defying rational explanation, fragile pages of Ramon's personal onboard diary survived. Despite the extreme heat of the explosion, the extreme atmospheric cold at 37 miles above the Earth, and weeks of rain, mud, and insects on the ground, Ilan's words remained readable. "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy," he wrote. A handwritten copy of the Friday night Kiddush prayer was Ilan's final message to the world.
So he said Kiddush, and he had it written down, word by word, in this diary. There's no rational explanation for the survival of this diary. It was found by an Indian tracker, guess where? Over Texas in a place called Palestine. This diary needed to be reconstructed because you can imagine it was very fragmented and most of the pages were actually destroyed. And NASA had a whole recovery, you can imagine. They were trying to piece together this whole disaster, and they were very, very concerned about gathering as much evidence as possible. But Rona Ramon, Ilan Ramon's wife, insisted that the diary come back to Israel because it was in Hebrew, and she knew that there was no one in the forensic departments of NASA that would be able to decipher the Hebrew. And they brought this diary back to Israel. And there was a lady in the Israeli police force who is originally from London, who I've met and spoken to quite a few times. And her job was to reconstruct this diary. The most fascinating thing. And she said she felt she was almost intruding into Ilan Ramon's personal life. This was his own diary that was meant for his own family. And Rona was very close to her, and they worked on it together. And she managed to piece it together. It was on exhibition in the Israel Museum a few years ago, and it's now been donated to the National Library. It's actually an heirloom of the Jewish people, this diary, where Ilan Ramon wrote out the Kiddush. So what we see clearly is Ilan Ramon saw himself as representing the Jewish people. The whole idea of taking kosher food, the whole idea of sanctifying Shabbos. But there's one thing that he took which moved him more than anything else.
Returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond. When the famous astronaut Ilan Ramon was selected to represent Israel in the fatal shuttle mission STS-107 Columbia, he chose to take with him a mini Torah scroll that had been smuggled into Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, for he felt that that represented the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
אני חושב שחשוב מאוד מאוד לשמור על המורשת ההיסטורית שלנו, והיסטורית אני מתכוון היסטורית ודתית. אני אראה מושג אחד, קיבלתי רשות מיוחדת, המושג הזה אני חושב הוא מושג מאוד מאוד מרגש. אני מתרגש שאני מחזיק אותו בידיי, וזהו ספר תורה, קטן כמו שאתם רואים. אז זה חוץ וזה חבל מקשר מאוד מאוד מרגש, והוא כאן איתי בחלל, ומאוד מתרגש לאחוז אותו פה בחלל, ואני חושב שזה מייצג יותר מכל את היכולת של העם היהודי לשרוד למרות כל דבר, מתקופות נוראיות להגיע בעצם מימים שחורים כשחור, בימים עם תקווה ואמונה בעתיד.
I was 8 years old. We came to Bergen-Belsen, the doors opened, the dogs again, the guards again. One of the people in the barrack was a Rabbi Simon Dasberg from Groningen in Amsterdam. He did many things in the camp. He continued being the rabbi of the people in the camp. And one day he came to me and said, "You're going on 13, do you want to become a bar mitzvah boy?" I said, "Yes, but how?" I said, "Well, I'm going to teach you if you're willing." Every morning at 4 o'clock, he woke me up and took me down to the table, opened up a little Torah scroll, and we used to study from it. He smuggled it into the camp and kept it with him, hidden. One morning, he said, "Well, the time has come." He had arranged everything. All the windows were shut off with blankets. There was a blanket on the table and the Torah scroll open waiting for me. A bunch of people were waiting there too, and he conducted a service, a real service. And when I almost got to the stage where I should read, there was a sudden knock on the door. Everybody froze. The rabbi went to the door and opened it, and there was my mother. It turned out that the rabbi found out where my mother was, and so they smuggled my mother from camp to camp. I ran up to her, and we were all crying, so of course. I went back to the table, I read my Torah portion, I spoke my bar mitzvah speech. After a ceremony was completed, somebody gave me one little cube of chocolate. The rabbi took me aside and said, "Here's this little Torah from which you read. I want you to take it." I told him, how can I take a Torah? I'm a little boy. Little boys don't take Torahs. He said, "Well, just promise me one thing. I am probably not going to come out of here alive. That is why I want you to have this. You must promise me that you will tell the story. What happened here?" And he pressed this box into my hands, and I looked at him and said, "Okay, I promise." He thought he would show it to the world as a symbol of how a person can go from the depth of hell to the heights of space. I had finally fulfilled my promise to Rabbi Simon Dasberg in a way I wish I would never have thought it would be possible.
There's something deeper than we think in us being what we are, in him being what he was and what he represented. And it's not only that the human being can carry a scroll, but the scroll can carry the human being.
The background and how this actually came about. How did Ilan Ramon get this little Sefer Torah? So Professor Yosef, the little bar mitzvah boy in Bergen-Belsen, got woken up at 4 a.m. I often think of me not wanting to go bar mitzvah lessons at 7 a.m. or 10 a.m. 4 a.m. in Bergen-Belsen for a bar mitzvah lesson. That's dedication. That's heroism. And Ilan Ramon was responsible for many experiments in the spaceship. The most important was when the MEDEX experiment, the Mediterranean dust experiment, and the world expert in this area was Professor Joachim Yosef, this Holocaust survivor, who had become a world-renowned physicist. He had got a degree from UCLA and he was now a professor at Tel Aviv University. And NASA identified him as a world expert and sent Ilan Ramon from America to Israel to be taught by this Professor Yosef to prepare for these experiments on the space shuttle. And he lived in Baka. He taught in Tel Aviv. He lived in Baka in Yerushalayim. And Ilan Ramon came 2 or 3 times. And the 4th time that he came, he was walking out of Professor Yosef's apartment. And he looked up on the mantelpiece and he saw a little wooden box. And he asked him, "What's that box?" And he told him the story. And Ilan Ramon thought about it. And he came back to America. He spoke to Rona, his wife, and he said, "I saw something that moved me so deeply that I need to think it through, but I want to ask Professor Yosef permission if I can take this with me to space." Now, by the way, you don't take what you like to space, okay? It's not like a El Al flight that you put in your bag, whatever. No, every gram is measured and you need permission. Anyway, Ilan Ramon explained to NASA the historical religious significance of this Sefer Torah, and NASA agreed for him to take it. And in that 60-second clip, when he spoke to Sharon, who was the Prime Minister of Israel, that was the biggest television audience in the history of the world at that time, before the European Championships and other things like that. But that was the biggest television audience. Look at the hashgacha of how Hashem helped a little 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy who promised to tell a story, had no idea how he gets to be the professor teaching Ilan Ramon, who's doing a MEDEX experiment, who's going to broadcast to the world the story of this little Sefer Torah. It's just unbelievable. So when I first saw this clip, I was very moved. I'm still moved. I've seen it maybe 1,000 times. And it didn't seem right how the story ended. 16 minutes before re-entry, the whole spaceship blew up. All the astronauts were killed. There was no Zeicher, there was no fragment of the Sefer Torah that survived. And I thought, these words of Ilan Ramon were so powerful that they needed to somehow be continued, and that the story couldn't end this way. And that we had to find some way to continue this message and to continue to tell the story. So together with a number of different people, we created a non-profit called Netzach Ruach Yehudi, the Triumph of the Jewish Spirit. And our first project was to write a replica Sefer Torah. If you have a look how big the Sefer Torah is, so it's basically 4.5 inches, around 11 centimeters. And we wanted to write a replica Sefer Torah which would have the same dimensions as this particular Sefer Torah, which is not that easy to do because you have to fit 42 lines into basically the size of a mezuzah. So this is not something that every sofer can do. But Baruch Hashem, we found a sofer in Bnei Brak, and we managed to recreate the Sefer Torah. And I'm going to share with you now just, a few of the clips from this Hachnasa Sefer Torah, just to give an idea of what it was about. For me, it was very much bringing together who are the heroes of the story? Who are the heroes? You can't be wrong. One, for sure, Ilan Ramon, Rabbi Dasberg. Imagine thinking of a bar mitzvah in Bergen-Belsen and waking a kid up at 4 a.m. and finding his mother and smuggling his mother to be at her son's bar mitzvah. Unbelievable hero. In fact, one of the things I found, Rabbi Dasberg died 11 weeks before the liberation. And one of the things he wrote, which survived, was a poem, which was an acronym basically. The first letter of each line is Ayin Taf Yud Daled, Atid, the future. I'm going to read it to you in Hebrew and I'll translate. Olam banoi v'hafuch ro'u ba'ayin. I saw a world that was built and destroyed, turned upside down. Torah v'tikun b'gola ayin. Torah and tikkun, and perfection and rectification in the galus, in the diaspora, there isn't. Yesh v'yesh, but there will be. Schar, there will be both Torah and tikkun. V'shavu l'gvulam, when the Jewish people return. Dor chadash kam, a new generation will arise, livnot ha'olam, to build the world. So, this was a vision of somebody in the darkest of hell to the future of the Jewish people, and that's Ilan Ramon's message. This is the message of Ilan Ramon, which we'll come to at the end, but that's really the message of Ilan Ramon. So, we set out on this project. It was quite a challenge to find a sofer. I'm just going to share with you a little bit. It's in Hebrew, so you'll bear with me. I'll translate as we go.
תוקעים כל כך הרבה זמן לכתוב אליי נתן בהתחלה סיפר לי את כל
He said when I came to him and started explaining to him this whole story, he actually started to cry.
פה אני התחברתי
I connected to the story.
כתבתי את זה מול העיניים.
I wrote it, Le'ilu Nishmas, these three people,
לעילוי נשמת הרב דסברג,
Rav Dasberg,
ולעילוי נשמת יויחי,
Joachim Yosef, the professor,
וגם לעילוי נשמת אילן רמון.
Ilan Ramon.
עמדו לי כל אחד והסיפור שלו
All
מול
three
העיניים
stood before my eyes every day before I
כל
wrote.
יום שאני שכתבתי את זה,
And I imagined
התחברתי כל הזמן בכתיבה
their journeys and each one of them and their heroism.
לסיטואציות שהם היו, והרגיש לי הרבה יותר טוב לכתוב כזה ספר כזה כותבים.
Now he's explaining how you write such a Sefer Torah.
עם המשקף מגדיל.
You need to write it with magnifying glasses because it's very small כתב.
הסופר אז, אבל מעניין היה לראות את הספר הזה, אבל אין אותו, אז ברוך השם שכתבנו, עיינתי את הסיטואציות שהם.
So he said he would love to have seen the original Sefer Torah, but it isn't here, so at least we've written it and we've continued it. So we did the dedication of the Sefer Torah in the Ramon school in Modi'in. in memory of Ilan, Ramon, and these heroes of the Jewish people. And I thought, who is the most appropriate person in the world to write the last letter in such a Sefer Torah? And Rav Lau's life is the story. He wrote the last two letters, the Shin and the Lamed of Yisrael, which is his name, Yisrael Lau.
הריני כותב ספר תורה זה לשם קדושת מצוות קדושת ספר תורה.
Rav Lau's also Sefer, but the Sefer was very worried that he was going to puzzle up the Sefer Torah. He was paranoid. He didn't want him to write the letters. So just look how carefully he's watching him. That and you should recognize Chaim Bibas. Me'arav Modi'in. So there was a little part of the lamed that he needed to just finish off. He said, how did you write this? How did you manage to write it? He said, I worked very hard. Spent a long, long time, day and night writing it. And
Baruch ato Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
what was very special is at this Achnasa Sefer Torah, we brought together all of the heroes of the story. So Rabbi Dasberg's daughter was still alive. She was in her 90s. She was connected on a video. She was bedridden. But her son and grandson were there. They wrote letters in the Sefer Torah. The squadron from Ilan Ramon's pilots wrote letters in the Sefer Torah. Joachim Yosef's family wrote. His wife is alive. His daughter's alive. So they were all part of this to try and really fulfill the words of Rabbi Dasberg, that there will be a generation that will arise and Torah will be rebuilt, and we're living it. To share with you now, this doesn't normally look like the streets of Modi'in don't normally look like this. This is the celebration after the Achnasa Sefer Torah. Okay, you get a sense, I mean, it's hard to describe it, but those that were there, I don't know if anyone was not, but and then something that I never dreamed of at all, and none of us dreamed of, is after the Simchat Torah massacre, my son, who's 34 years old and studying for the Rabbanut, he had one exam left, left the Smicha program and went into the army. And it's a long story, but he landed up on the border in Gaza with Givati. And one day I get a call to tell me that the Pluga Givati is in Gaza for a few weeks. and they haven't had a Sefer Torah. Could I get the Sefer Torah to Gaza? So I called Rabbi Vilna. I said, I need you urgently to meet me. I drove down to the border. I don't know why, but the insurance agent wasn't keen to give me insurance for the Sefer Torah in Gaza. But this is the Sefer Torah in Gaza. And really, as you look at these images, I think that this more than anything represents the ability of the Jewish people to survive from the darkest of times to days of light and hope in the future. And that is the Jewish people. This Torah that was in the Holocaust is in this Holocaust, and we're still holding on and we're still dancing. And that's the strength of the Jewish people. So this is my son here. Yeah, the truth is, when I started, Rabbi Markovitz said, how long can you speak for? I can speak for days. The problem is, how long can you sit here for? So I think that more or less gives you a sense of the story and what we tried to do and are doing. We use the Sefer Torah all the time for Bar Mitzvah programs. We just did a Bar Mitzvah for kids from Storot. We did a Bar Mitzvah from kids from Haifa, from the orphanage. And it can be very, very powerful for these children to see that they're part of this miraculous people, part of this incredible people who have one people and one journey. And it doesn't matter where we are, and it doesn't matter how dark, and it doesn't matter how terrible things are. We are all heroes. Everyone living in Israel today is a hero and a heroine. To be living here in the midst of this incredibly difficult time. But we have the ability to survive because we have a connection to Torah, a connection to the infinite, and a connection to the world that we know is ultimately far more real than this world. And that's what is the inspiration and the connection of the Jewish people. And that's what allows soldiers, however observant or not observant, every Jewish soul has a deep connection to the Torah. We know that Torah is comprised of Hebrew letters, and every Jewish soul is comprised of Hebrew letters. And there's a direct connection between the Jewish souls and the Sefer Torah. And, you know, Bezrat Hashem, we should be able to use the Sefer Torah to inspire, and I'm open to any ideas, suggestions, anyone that has any ideas of how we can use it, more than happy to hear. We actually have the Sefer Torah here, so for those of you that haven't seen it, I especially had the Sefer Torah in this type of a box because it was reminiscent to me of the Holocaust and Jews on the run, which is pretty much our history. Yeah, everyone can just come up and I can just show it to you. I don't know if you can see it, but does anyone see what's written in the roots of the tree? There's some letters. There's an Aleph. There's a Yud. So it's Ilan. This is the tree of the Jewish people. So, you just show them the Sefer Torah? Yeah. If you want to come and look. And any questions, whatever, feel free.
Oh, so one can read from it.
Yeah, so it is possible to read without a magnifying glass. I mean, you have to be a pretty good Balkore, but you can read it.
Definitely.
The Kesav is readable. I mean, it's not. You need. It's readable. Yeah. So if you have a look here on the Eitz Chaim, so it says Leilu Nishmas,
Ilan and
right? And then Leilu Nishmas Joachim Yosef,
when did the professor pass away?
2008. Yeah. But his family are very,
Yeah. What is your connection for that? I didn't understand that. Just got into.
no connection. The story moved me so much that I just.
Is there something about a friend from Los Angeles?
No, he just happened to be my next door neighbor, but it's nothing to do with the Sefer Torah.
Are you looking for mistake? Yeah.
So that's a very interesting question because he was absolutely obsessed that this Sefer Torah never left that box.
No.
But the answer is no, because what he was concerned about is fulfilling the promise. And he fulfilled the promise in a way that he says, I could never have dreamed of. How would I have ever dreamed of being able to broadcast this message to the world?
How can you learn from it?
You can learn from it. I mean, I can't learn from it. I can't learn. Yeah.
But if you're 13.
No, that's another thing. Yeah, exactly. If you're not, if you don't have glasses, but you can.
The original.
So no one knows that. There's a twin of that Sefer Torah in Cincinnati. And interestingly, when Ilan Ramon passed away with the Sefer Torah, NASA was so moved he had explained to him what the Torah is and the meaning of the Torah. There was a non-Jewish astronaut who asked permission from this Jewish person in Cincinnati who had a twin Sefer Torah, if he could take that Sefer Torah to fly to space, Leilu Nishmas Ilan Ramon. And NASA agreed. He took this little Sefer Torah and he flew just Leilu Nishmas, whatever that meant. But in memory of Ilan Ramon, they were so moved. Ilan Ramon had a tremendous impact on the whole crew. They were planning on all coming to Israel after this mission. Ilan Ramon's son had a bar mitzvah 8 weeks after the mission, and he was supposed to be laning from the Sefer Torah. And one of the things in the diary was a Dvar Torah that Ilan Ramon had written for that bar mitzvah, which this woman, only because she's religious, worked out which parsha from the Torah it was from, and she worked out the Dvar Torah.
How long did it take her to put it together?
Months. And it was painstaking. You have no idea. It's I mean, I've got some of the documents. It looked, when you saw it, it was, it was pincer, literally microscope, and then it was trying to fit.
Yeah.
It was like a jigsaw puzzle. But then there was more the technology that could take the pages that were wiped away and reenact, bring back the whatever had been written on those pages through the technology. So it was painstaking.
Where is this currently? Where is this kept?
So this is kept in Ayala Tashach in this shul here, but it's taken all the time to be used in bar mitzvah programs in Gaza.
It's interesting that he had a non-digital diary.
Sorry?
That he kept a manual diary, not a digital.
Yeah. There's also just There's a manual diary, handwritten. Just a fascinating thing, which I forgot to mention. I was thinking, why out of all the things that Ilan Ramon, I mean, he took a lot of different artifacts, but this is the thing he decided he was going to show to the world. Obviously, it was related to the whole story in Bergen-Belsen, but I think there was a much deeper reason, and that is that every Jew has a spiritual connection to the Torah. So he didn't even consciously realize this, but we say, Histakel baraisa baralma, that says in the Zohar that Hashem looked into the Torah and he created the world. So it's a very deep, I think, metaphysical reality that he connected so much to this Torah, and this is what he took up. And there's a halacha that when a sofer writes a Sefer Torah, he's not allowed to write from memory. He has to copy, right? Hastakel baraisa, you look at the Torah and you write. So this Sefer was really like painstaking to write. We started at the beginning of COVID, which landed up being the biggest bracha because no one else had any work. So the Sefer just basically day and night was working on the Sefer Torah. There are much smaller Sefer Torahs that have been written. Rav Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal had a 5 centimeter Sefer Torah, they're kosher. But The Sefer that wrote that one,
Museum, which is a micro.
right, Mark, the one that wrote that particular Sefer Torah couldn't write again after that. His eyes, it was so difficult to write. That, here he did it because of the technology. And that's why he said to me, he's very, very doubtful that original Sefer Torah with the technology of those days could have been kosher, because to write with micro calligraphy without, being able to check that no letters touching and none of the, the tagim, but, we'll never know. Never know.
The yad is beautiful as well.
Yeah, so the thing is that the Sefer Torah he took, if you saw, looked a bit like those children's Simchas Torah, and it didn't have the cover that I wanted it to have for, using it in my mitzvah. So we spent a lot of money on the Eitzei Chaim and that it should look mechubad.
Were his parents, Ilan, Ramon's parents, were alive still when he
died? Yeah.
When he died?
Yeah. It's terrible. It's Eov. The family has been through literally Eov. But those are the words, that we will go through the deepest of hell, the darkest of times, and we'll come out, because we're a people that has a future and a hope. And that's a message going into Shavuos. It doesn't matter how tough things are. We have a Torah, and that's the guarantee of the Jewish people. Yeah. Okay.
It's one end of the year, right?
Yeah, that's magnificent.
So what is this shul that it's kept here?
That's another story. There's about 100 stories within the stories, but initially, whatever, this Sefer Torah landed up here because we did the dedication in Modi'in, and the mayor wanted that the Sefer Torah should be in the shul in Modi'in, and one of my partners in this project is Rabbi Yirmiyah Abramov, who runs a lot of kiruv programs, and Rav Aryeh Vilna was a student of his, and he was in Modi'in, so that was how it landed up here.
Do you know how the original one smuggled in?
Yeah, I mean, so he hid it. He was the chief rabbi of Amsterdam, Rav Dasberg. So from what I could understand, it was in a handkerchief the whole time. He had it in a little handkerchief under the pillow of his barrack.
Interesting.
And then, I mean, this bar mitzvah boy, I mean, he's risking his entire life. He agrees to take the Sefer Torah. I mean, if the Nazis, Yamach Shamam, finding with the Sefer Torah, so that's unbelievable heroism, unbelievable bravery, and to have been so obsessed at keeping this. The Aron itself, the little is in Heichel Shlomo, in the museum. But that's just, that's all that's left, is this little Aron. This little...
Do we know from which shul in Amsterdam it came?
Kronenberg, I think. He was a Rav. Yeah.
So this is the actual size of the original.
So the Ketav, if you look at the size, it's 10 centimeters. It's 11 centimeters, yeah. It's as close as we could get. Yeah, because it's smaller, because it doesn't have the Eitzei Chaim and it doesn't have, but if you look at the actual Ketav itself, if you look at the size of that's sort of the size of Ilan Ramon's hand, Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to thank Neil for coming again and for telling us this incredible story. I was certainly blown away. Like I said, I got a taste before, but this was a gourmet meal that we got of the story. And
this is the abridged version.
B'ezrat Hashem, we should have the zchus to continue spreading the Torah and to be mechazik all of us.
Amen.
Going forward. Thank you for coming.
See you on later.